Okay, so this is the Math 2 Unit 2B review. Number 1, state the characteristics each equation reveals without changing the form of the equation. So we're looking at the equation over here. I want to know what characteristics this equation reveals. So normally I have an equation. In this form, it would be a times x minus h squared plus k. Okay, so that's exactly the same form because I have those parentheses and I'm subtracting something, then I square my parentheses, and then I add a value at the end, where negative 2 is my a value, and then 2 and 11 are my h and my k values. That h and k reveals my vertex. So 211 would be my vertex. And I would have to do a lot of solving in order to find my zeros or my y-intercept. But that gives me my vertex. So if I go over here to my options, it says A reveals the maximum value of m of x, B reveals the zeros, and C reveals the value of m of x when x equals 0. Well, when x equals 0, I would have to plug that 0 in, subtract 2, so I get negative 2, I square that, and then I multiply by negative 2, and then I add 11. I have to do a lot of work. It just doesn't actually reveal it immediately. B, to find the zeros, I would have to find where my graph crosses the x-axis, and in this case I have a negative a value, so my graph would open down, but I still can't see immediately where it crosses the x-axis. The maximum is the vertex, so the answer to 1A would be A. 1B, what I can see in this form really easily is that C value. That C tells me something very important, so it's going to tell me one of these two things. It's not going to tell me my zeros, because in order for me to find my zeros for a quadratic equation in standard form like this, I'd have to set it equal to 0 and then use the quadratic formula to solve. So the quadratic formula is going to take some time and some work, so it doesn't immediately reveal it. This immediately reveals my y-intercept, which would be 0, 15. That would be my y-intercept on my graph, so I could plot that point, which also tells me my x value is 0. Well, that's C. This form down here tells me when m of x equals 0, what my two solutions for x are going to be, because if my m of x equals 0, then either this piece that I'm multiplying, this x minus 3, or this x plus 7 has to be 0. So I set each of those equal to 0 to find my two different zeros of my function. X would be 3, this x would be negative 7. That was easy to find, a lot easier than finding 1b if I were to use the quadratic formula to find my zeros. So whenever your function is equal to 0 and you can find your x values easily, that's finding your zeros easily. Number 2, circle the letter of the equations below that will have no real solution. So we're going to take a look at this no real solutions part. That doesn't mean it doesn't have a solution. That just means my solutions are not real. So if they're not real, then what's the opposite of real? In math, they are imaginary. So whatever gives me an imaginary number, and I know that an imaginary number is equal to the square root of negative 1.